Most of the great sitcoms are written by two blokes who went to school together. I got very lucky that I came up with a sitcom that I knew how to write in my 20s. It's what I call a permanent act 2. Sitcoms distort the consequences of sin. Here's the other reason it's so successful. Take it from me. It's really, really funny.
Hello, Reform mythologist Nate Morgan Locke here, and today I am joined by screenwriter, author James Cary to talk about situation comedy. James, hello.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Probably full disclosure, I should say that we've been friends, close friends, for a number of years now, and have had many conversations that have been recorded, often talking about animated films and Christianity and that sort of stuff. But I've never actually asked you about your day job, which is writing situation comedy. So I thought we should do that.
Why not?
First question then, what's the best sitcom?
I can tell you two of my favourites, although there's a third, which I'm just thinking, oh man, that's so good. But my favourite British sitcom, because it's perfect, is Yes, Prime Minister. So when I watch that, I basically can't think of a better joke for any of the jokes that they've already got. And I can't think of a better plot. I'm not just going, oh, you missed a bit. And I just love it. Yeah. The words are amazing. Yeah. And it's got this kind of eternal truth to it about if you want to be in power, these are the trade-offs on health, on education, on transport, on nuclear weapons, all that kind of stuff. So I just think it's absolutely amazing and perfect. I'm not putting Blackadder on the list, even though I've basically memorized at least 2 series of it. It is amazingly funny. I do love Seinfeld. I just love the weirdness of Seinfeld. And I was always a bit sad that British people did not take it into their hearts like they could have done, because it feels quite British, because it's not like Friends where it's all huggy and learny. Yeah. But I'm just re-watching the first series of Arrested Development with my oldest daughter, and just amazed at how funny it is. Again, I've always loved it. I describe Arrested Development as unnecessarily funny. It just over delivers, not just in terms of jokes and characters, but the plotting is just like jump out of the chair, so clever. Yeah. I can't believe you did that. That's so rare. So those are my three hot tips.
They're actually quite different from each other. In terms of even just the style of filming. So Arrested Development's narration over the top and single camera and all the bit
very choppy. Yeah,
it's not done in the studio at all. Then with Seinfeld and Yes, Prime Minister and Blackadder, they're all studio based, right?
Yeah, I like both, and I think as long as you do the medium well. So there's quite a lot of shows in the last 20 years where they're single camera shows, as we call them in the biz, but they don't really have the pace that you would need. Whereas a show like 30 Rock, which is ironically about a studio sketch show called TGS with Tracy Morgan, it's got absolutely loads and loads of pace to it. So I think as long as you're, suit the medium, it works really well either way. And I like both as long as you make the most of both.
Yeah. So what is the commonality then in a sitcom? What makes a sitcom rather than just being a funny drama?
I think one key thing is the fact that it's, as you sort of point out in your video, it's a precinct. I mean, it literally is in the case of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It is a police precinct, but it is a world in which characters remain trapped for whatever reason. With each other, so it's essentially the same show every week, and so to some extent, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Murder mysteries are the same show every week. Every episode of Murder, She Wrote is basically the same. It's not, there's a murder and she solves it. The suspects sub in and out. The method of murder but every show has basically got a formula. House, I loved House. Medical detective show, really. Every episode's basically the same. Lovely. It's like a Happy Meal, isn't it? You know what you're getting. That's why they're so popular and comforting. But so it's the fact that it's that kind of world with characters that you like or love not liking or whatever. There's usually a mix or a blend. But there's normally, either a monster or a person at the heart of it, or there's like a gang of people or a central relationship. So one of the great British sitcoms is Only Fools and Horses. That's really about two brothers. That's really about Del Boy and Rodney. Of course, there's Grandad and then Uncle Albert. But actually, it's really about that relationship and how they're trying to make their way in the world in two different ways. Or you might have a show like One Foot in the Grave, which is essentially a monster. Victor Meldrew is a monster, or Keeping Up Appearances, Hyacinth Bouquet. Miranda, a show that I worked on, she's at the centre of it, and it's about her relationship with her mother, her best friend, and her wannabe boyfriend. And so it's completely about her. But it's about characters, it's not about story. And when I'm sort of mentoring people in writing sitcoms, they get quite excited about stories. And you go, whoa, no, that's a movie, not a sitcom.
So the best sitcoms, or great sitcoms, I mean, you must have rattled off about 24 already in this conversation. But so there's some great ones. There is quite a bit of variety, and yet the thing that holds it together is this idea of a character or multiple characters who are stuck in a bit of a loop.
It's what I call a permanent act two. So, in a movie, you have the protagonist leaves their world and goes into this other world, and there are trials and tribulations and temptations, and eventually they figure out how to get out of it and then get back to where they started, or get back to their promised land, or whatever it is. These guys can't figure their way out of it. They because of who they are and because of their situation, they're just essentially doomed to repeat the mistake every single week. And they learn a bit, but they never really learn enough to get that escape velocity they need to get out of it. Which is why most last episodes of sitcoms are terrible, because you're trying to end an unendable format.
Right.
You've created something that should just keep running.
Yeah.
And then it's very hard to end it without infuriating people. Or you just don't worry about it. And it's a bit like, the last episode of Friends is pretty good. But it's just really sad because it's they're all leaving and moving on, and they're not really changing. So last episodes that try to kind of wrap things up, it's normally quite hard because they're not designed to be wrapped up.
So I want to come back to some of those, because some of the people watching will know that I've made the video essay about sitcoms, largely stealing from your, from our conversations, passing off those ideas.
You have been influenced by some things I've said.
But in terms of particular endings of whether it's Seinfeld or Friends or The Office, although it's not the ending, the end of the video essay is actually when Michael Scott leaves the US office rather than the final episode.
Yeah, it's really sweet, wasn't it? I've not seen the US office. I've heard it's really good, but that was, I thought, I wonder if that's him leaving, but it's not even the last series, is it? Because there's another series without him.
Yeah, and we can get into the differences between American sitcoms and kind of these British.
I don't know if there are any. We don't need to get into that because I don't have anything to say on it.
There aren't any differences?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, we'll come back to whether or not there are any differences in a minute.
If you like.
A little bit more on the issue of being a sitcom writer. So how do you become a professional writer of sitcoms? What's the path to get there?
There is no path, especially not now. There was when I was starting out, sort of, because you would sort of write for sketch shows and those sorts of things and do the sorts of things that sitcom writers do. In the last 20 years, the whole ecosystem has completely changed and not particularly settled in anything that represents any kind of career path, really. So, but essentially, you do. I mean, most of the great sitcoms are written by two blokes who went to school together or met at university.
Okay.
Apart from someone like Carla Lane, who was just an amazing writer who just wrote, The Liverbirds and Bread and things like that, or Victoria Wood, who wrote Dinner Ladies. But usually, some people come through sort of dramas and then they get funny, but actually a lot of it is from the sketch show tradition. So like the two Ronnies back in the day, and in America that would be Saturday Night Live, and there are people where traditionally they would go on and make movies. And actually I just watched Wayne's World with my kids for the first time, and thinking about Saturday Night Live as this launch pad for a whole load of comedy. So sketches sketches are like the building blocks of sitcoms, because each scene's sort of a sketch in its own right, but but then you sort of join them up. So if you go through that kind of training, as it were, after a while, you kind of have an idea for a show which gets enough interest to end up on television. In America, the system's much better because, although again, that's too fragmenting, you might get a job on somebody else's sitcom. So a brilliant writer about comedy and writing called Rob Long, who's actually just gone to seminary in the Episcopal Church.
Oh.
His first job was on Cheers, the biggest show on television, and he started as a staff writer, writing jokes and just, and listening and filling in a little bit. And by the end, he was the showrunner. He was the actual guy in charge of Cheers when it finished. So he literally worked his way up. And you can do that if you're making 23 episodes of a show every year. You sort of have this apprenticeship kind of thing. Whereas in the UK, it just hasn't really generally worked like that. So everyone's kind of making it up as we go along.
But your sketch writing was at school, was at sort of university. Yeah.
And thereafter, Radio 4 sketches, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So I did a whole load of that kind of, because sketches are about ideas. You establish an idea really quickly, you rinse it for all the jokes, and then you just need one little twist to get out of it.
Yeah. To stick the landing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a bit like doing scales, it's a bit like you can't really be a decent concert pianist if you can't do scales. No one actually wants to hear you play scales, but you need to learn those skills. So, it's there's a craft element to it as well. There's an aged element to it. I got very lucky that I came up with a sitcom that I knew how to write in my 20s. I did a show called Think the Unthinkable for BBC Radio 4, and it was about management consultants. But it was about the fact that I was at university with people who are now management consultants, telling people twice their age how to run their business with no business or life experience of their own. And I thought, that's funny. And I bet you the older Radio 4 audience would find it quite funny to hear these chinless wonders talk about management and stuff in their companies and sort of radical transformation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I came up with an idea that suited me to write as a younger writer, but normally people don't tend to get into writing sitcoms until they're a little bit older. And then you write novels in your 40s and 50s.
Yeah, but is that because when you kind of need that little bit of world experience because there is something about the sitcom which is worldly wise or which is kind of or potentially jaded? It seems to me that lots of the best sitcom characters are the people who've almost resigned themselves to this is the way the world is and it's never going to change. And then they almost kind of need someone else as a foil next to them to be a little bit more optimistic. But of course they can't because it's a sitcom. They are locked in this thing.
Yeah. I mean, you do get those engine, dynamic sitcom characters like Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec, and she's got her Ron Swanson, who is essentially in the same way you've got Tina Fey's Liz Lemon in 30 Rock. And then she's got her Jack Donaghy, who explains to her why all of her political and clever ideas are garbage and will never work because people like him are in charge. But I think it takes that age and experience to basically see the world two ways rather than one way, and to see the world through the perspective of six characters rather than one character. So political satire, seeing the world very simplistically, being very angry about this, that, or the other, that all works fine. And that lends itself to sketch, to review, to, satire and, Punch magazine or whatever it was, Private Eye, those sorts of things. It's very easy to call out hypocrisy and all that kind of stuff. But for a proper sitcom, you sort of do need both sides of the story. So, Yes, Prime Minister, that show I mentioned, it's famously about the political will and the administrative won't. And so you need, and there's a sense in which, I don't know whose side you're on, and I've sort of always traditionally been on the side of Jim Hacker because he's at least an elected representative. Right. But he also needs to be protected from himself because he's an idiot. But Sir Humphrey Appleby, the senior civil servant, is sort of trying to do his own thing as well. So you kind of need that sophistication of understanding that it's kind of both and, and that's what sitcom at its best really, really does that. It really highlights the fact that we live in tension. Wow, this is interesting. I've not really thought about this before. The fact that we're trapped in this precinct is a sense in which we are trapped in a world which has paradox, doesn't it? We don't want to suffer, but we can only grow through suffering. We don't want to be vulnerable, but you can only love by being vulnerable. Yeah. We want to control things, but in controlling them, we then make them worse or whatever. Yeah, yeah. So I think that's what sitcom is so rich in, and it sort of, which is surprising because it's the TV equivalent of a Happy Meal, isn't it?
Yeah. What happens when you've got a sitcom which is basically led by an individual who is both writer and star? So I'm thinking Miranda, obviously, and that was something you can speak from experience on. The other ones, Everyone Loves Raymond or Ellen or Seinfeld. What's the way that they're going to be able to have other people's opinions given the same validity as theirs? Or does it just turn into a kind of univocal situation where one character always is going to get the best lines?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, the central character, funnily enough, in Seinfeld's not the funniest character. He's also the worst actor by quite a considerable margin, by his own admission. There's a really funny Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, where he's comparing notes with John Oliver, who was in episodes of Community. And they were both just saying, we can't act for toffee. And we're standing next to people who are acting in scenes. And we're just standing there just going, wow, they're really good. And then we remember that it's our line. It's our turn to speak. And they're just like total chances. But I think in a way, so working with Miranda, what was brilliant about that was she knew what worked for her. She had a really laser guided sense of her own comedy sensibility. So she would just say, oh, I think that would be funny. I don't know, and she's out there doing it. So she's like, I don't see how I would make that work. I can't quite see how that would. But she's got 3 characters to play off, and she's a slightly different person and a slightly different status with each character, actually, which I think is quite interesting. Because Miranda's a low status person because she's sort of domineered by her mother. And in the eyes of the world, she's seen as, she's tall and, mistaken for a man in the first episode and various sorts of things like that. But actually in the shot with Stevie, she's actually the dominant character because Stevie's sort of tiny, but she's this powerhouse. But Miranda basically keeps pushing her off the chair and she's the boss in her own shop. And so in a way, that kind of hierarchy is normally quite interesting. So Blackadder is a really interesting example of someone. We shouldn't like Blackadder because he's dishonest, particularly in, series 2, 3 and 4. In series 2, he's in the Elizabethan court and he's horrible. But the Queen's worse. And Baldric, who he's in charge of, is an idiot, as is Percy. So him being the smartest guy just sort of doesn't really get him anywhere. So he's kind of got that sense of despair about him, that he's sort of surrounded by idiots. But he's kind of got to survive because if he gets a foot wrong, he's going to be killed by the baby-eating Bishop of Bath and Wells or executed by the Queen. Blackadder goes forth, obviously. He could get killed in this war any time. So he has got to be really careful how he does it. But he's surrounded by idiots. But he's kind of in the middle. You've got the General Melchett at the top and you've got Baldric at the bottom. So normally it's the relationships and the networks of characters. So, Peralta in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Brooklyn Nine-Nine's a gang show, but it is the Peralta show, isn't it? But he sort of got Captain Holt above him. He also loves Amy. Technically, Terry's in charge of him, but embarrassingly, Charles is like looks up to him and loves him in this slightly bizarre fan kind of a way. So he's kind of stuck with all of these different relationships, which are kind of asymmetrical in different ways. And actually, the complexity you get then is really. You did ask, so I'm really going into it now, aren't I?
I love
the complexity of that gets really complex very quickly, and that's where it's interesting and funny because you just think it's a bit like playing a piano. Well, there's only 8 notes and there's a scale. How can there be new tunes? It's like it gets a chess match. Well, you can only move these pieces. All right, but you're up to a billion combinations quite quickly. So it does all work.
What are the challenges for a writer who's saying, I need to give equal weight to these 6 different characters over the course of a series? And no, actually, the most interesting person here is this guy because, as you say, he's in this asymmetric setup, or all roads converge on him at some point.
The beauty of sitcom is the fact that you're making it up as you go along. So you write the pilot and then you shoot the pilot. And then when it goes to series, you discover what you've actually got. So I believe the initial premise of Friends is very much Monica and Joey. That they were going to be the hot couple. And, Chandler's his goofy friend and Ross is her brother, and so I think Friends is quite unusual because it ends up being about 6 characters and there isn't a main character. It's quite a hard trick to pull off, and I suspect they didn't even try to pull it off. That's just the way it worked out. Quite quickly you work out where the energy is and you think, oh, that's the show. The show's over here, not over here. And so once you get that, you get a bit of that even when you're casting it. You just go, oh, this is the So I did a show called Bluestone 4-2, and series 1, I think it's always been about Captain Nick Medhurst, who was the bomb disposal expert. But we just made sure that in series 2 that he was the main character in the main plot each week. So the A plot, which is the main story, is the Nick Medhurst plot. And then the others we were kind of fitting in around. And because what normally happens, if you've got 6 characters, say, you've got 3 plots probably, and you've got one plot is about Monica and Joey, and then you've got another plot which is about Ross and Rachel, and you've got another plot which is about Phoebe and Chandler, or and various kind of things run alongside each other. So you can always involve them. And over the course of a series, you do get the sense of, oh, we've had a lot of this character doing this sort of thing. We should have this other character doing this other sort of thing. Or, oh, we've never actually seen Phoebe and Chandler together very much, actually. And that was kind of funny. So why don't we... So that's the beauty of the fact that you've, all being well, in America at least, you got 20 chances to do different versions of this, and then quite often series 2 is better and series 3 is great. 4, 5, 6, brilliant. 7, 8, 9, law of diminishing returns, cast think they should get more money but are contractually obliged to get the same money they got for series 1. All that kind of stuff starts to kick in a bit.
So the setup with a writer's room, you were saying that there was often sitcoms are best written when it's just a couple of guys who went to school with each other. But
that's British shows where there are 6 episodes.
Oh, okay. But when, of course, it's going to be a longer thing, it's likely to be a number of different writers brought on at different stages, or...
Yeah, if you're doing 20 of them, there's going to be a room of 8, 10 people, and... they're going to be breaking stories regularly. And usually you've got somebody who's in charge of the room who's not normally the showrunner is doing an awful lot of producing as well. Whereas I think they call it the strong number 2. His deputy essentially is doing all the story. That's the job I want. I don't want to be a showrunner. I'd love to be doing that. I just find that, story of the week, well, how are we going to do this story? That's a great idea for a show. How do we get there? What happens next? What story, what's the subplot of that episode? Have we got anything to go with that? So there's 6, 8, 10 people sat around pitching ideas, going back to ideas they've had before they haven't managed to get to work, all that kind of stuff. And it really is as boring and as simple as that in that sense. There's a whiteboard usually, and or flip charts, and that's just how you do it. There's no magic formula in that sense. It's just sort of working out the beats of the story.
So there's the beats of the story. Obviously, that stuff's got to change every week. But when you land on something as powerful as a catchphrase or some aspect of a character that gets developed, is there a eureka moment where someone points out, that is it, that is the heart of our sitcom in one phrase? Or is that stuff that people bring and just have threaded in already?
You tend to discover that when the audience have seen it. You tend to discover. So I believe that I Don't Believe It, which is a catchphrase from One Foot in the Grave. David Rennick hadn't noticed that he gave that line to the lead a few times in the first series. And then it was like, oh, I love his catchphrase. He hasn't got a catchphrase. Yeah, he says, I don't believe it. Does he? So we had a catchphrase in our very first episode of Bluestone 4-2, which has a very big swear word in it. And we don't mention it for the rest, but people kept mentioning it. So in series 2, it became a bit of a catchphrase throughout the whole series. And it's based on stuff that army people do actually say to each other. But it's quite often you just sort of don't know until you don't quite know where the show is or what it is. And then you sort of realize once you watch it at home, in your sitting room, on your sofa, next to your other half, you realize what the show's really about. It's amazing that you think you know, and you sort of do, but then once you've done it, but sometimes you don't, and so that's why it doesn't work. It's like you thought it was about this, that hasn't really worked. Yeah. Nothing else has quite filled that void, and this is sort of isn't really anything.
What's the line that you're most proud of?
My very first sitcom was on the radio, and it was called Think the Unthinkable, about management consultants. And I had some jokes really early on, because at that stage you just think you're terrified you're not going to think of any more jokes, so you're just so proud of the ones that you've got. But but it's one of those things where you think, oh, that's a really funny joke. I bet you it won't ever make it to the to the radio for whatever reason, or won't survive the edit. But there was just one joke about trying to think of imaginative solutions to get people to use their bikes more in London. And somebody has the idea, could we get London to be mostly downhill? And I always just loved that as a joke. And then when it actually finally made it into a show and then went out on the radio, I thought of that joke quite a long time ago. And I'm so pleased it's finally gone out. But there are jokes occasionally where you think, like I used to write Milton Jones's radio show with him as well. There are one or two jokes on that which I've sort of had him rolling around my head for ages, and suddenly just go, oh, this weird situation has meant that we could use this joke here. There was one observation I always thought. So I wrote a play called The God Particle, and I ended up filming and that kind of stuff. But there's a joke in that I've always really loved and would love to use on television at some point, but haven't, which is the idea that if you're a biologist, you're a biologist. But if if you study theology, you're not a theologist, you're a theologian. And so somebody who doesn't know any theologians just says, you study theologist? And it's like, theologian. Oh, okay. And then later on, they sort of say it the wrong way around.
Okay.
And I think they say biologian instead of biologist.
Yeah.
And so, but I remember writing that joke in the script, just thinking, I thought of this, I think when I was 17 or something. You know what I mean? Right. Occasionally you realise this is an ancient joke that I've finally got the right space for.
Well, as a mythologist rather than a mythologian.
Yeah, Reform Mythologian. That's a rival YouTube channel right there.
I was thinking just the other day, you know how if you teach, you're a teacher, and if you preach, you're a preacher, but if you coach, you're not a coacher. You're a coach. Why is that?
Yeah.
The reason any stories work is because they steal past watchful dragons. If you dress things up in a story, or you've got a story, then that will move people emotionally. Sitcoms can particularly do that because the characters in sitcoms are so relatable. They're flawed, they're stuck, they're funny, and that makes them endearing to us. And therefore, when the sitcom wants to say something a bit more profound, we are absolutely ready to receive it. Did you have any particular thoughts on that? Because I know you've said that sitcoms are a very conservative or very Christian concept.
Yeah. They're intensely moral.
Yeah.
Because we know what should happen. And so in a way that's the counter narrative that's running, is if your character tells a lie in the first 3 minutes, they're going to spend the rest of the episode covering up that lie. And eventually we're pretty sure that the truth will come tumbling out and have both unexpected and entirely predictable consequences. We kind of have that oughtness watching it, like watching a romantic comedy. We know that they are meant to be together. And so we are willing that to be the case. And so I think there is a profound sense of justice historically about comedies. I think it's interesting now that lots of things are starting to fall apart. I don't think it's possible to have an existentialist sitcom. I just think that's kind of, although people say Seinfeld's about nothing, I think in a way their callousness is interesting and a counterpoint, but isn't it's outrageous as well. Like, I've never watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but I've heard that's a really outrageous show. But the thing that makes it interesting, like South Park, is that it sort of does and says the unsayable. So it's got the luxury of being a variation on a theme that's already been established by 2,000 years of Christian history. You are welcome. Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. The other thing that I just wanted to say, because I just think, this is comedy writers union unite here. When people say that, oh, isn't it brave when a sitcom does this? What? When a character speaks for a minute without saying any jokes? That's really easy. Because jokes are really hard. But just a character without jokes saying how they feel is what you spend most of your energy trying to avoid doing. So that one moment where you just take off the taps and just go, oh, I feel really discriminated against because of X, and this is not okay. It's really, it's normally quite bad television.
Right.
But B, it's like the easiest thing in the world to write. And you've earned it because you've had them being funny for 3, 4, 9, 12 years.
Yeah.
So I'm not, in one sense, I'm not knocking it, but I think people tend to think that it's brave or great writing. It's just like, nah, not really. It's the other stuff that's funny. It's the funny stuff, that's hard.
I highlighted the puppy episode of Ellen when Ellen came out. The reveal, the scene in which she does that is funny because she reveals it in a funny way.
Into a hot microphone. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when what a character wants and what a character needs and what is funny can be incredibly persuasive in a way that most people aren't critiquing. And so there's a kind of double thinking that a Christian needs to do, which is to both be able to enjoy comedy, but then also have a kind of critical faculty to be able to judge what's going on, but to recognize it is going to be emotive.
I mean, that's why people change their mind on theology. Is because they meet someone and know someone and they just think, well, I know someone like that and it's fine. I know someone who's and so we shouldn't be surprised that once you get to know someone like a sitcom character and then they bring out this reveal. But it's very interesting that you wouldn't back then, if they'd had that as the feature at the start, this is about a same-sex attracted woman. No, it wouldn't have got on, and if it had, it wouldn't have been watched all necessarily. But she knew that's what she experienced, and that the show might go there eventually. I guess I don't know. We don't really know people's motivations. Quite often they don't know their motivations.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's no different to, an awful lot of bishops in the Church of England were brought up evangelical with orthodox views on same-sex relationships, and they've changed their mind. Why? Because of one of their kids.
Yeah.
One of their kids is gay married. So, and they can't bring themselves to condemn it, and so they change their theology. That's the main way people change their theology. So sitcom is just that, it's just like, I love this character. I can't believe that this character is morally degenerate or this or whatever it is. It's completely understandable.
Yeah. The way that we're wired is to be mythopathic, for our feelings to potentially go against our better judgment, and that we don't have an ability to distinguish between this is something I feel because I'd like it, I want it to be true, and this is something that's actually true. Yeah.
And also I think all you've got in a sitcom scene is those characters in the moment, in that situation. And there are other vectors and factors going on that may be playing in the minds of the audience, but they're not being represented on the screen necessarily. And it goes back to the Jonathan Haidt thing about the righteous mind, about how people make decisions. And if you're making your decisions emotionally, if you're making your decisions based on fairness, but if you have an element of the sacred as part of your decision-making process, well, that's not going to be represented in a particular conversation unless you have that character in the room, which they may well not be at the time, and it would be hard for them even to be a sympathetic character if they were. But there are other situations in which, so I'm just thinking, I know it's not a comedy, but the end of the Brideshead Revisited movie, I remember, it's really sad. But this is a Roman Catholic family who have got themselves into this sort of position, and this sort of self-destructive thing. But that's who they are, and they sort of cling to this this kind of religious worldview that means everything to them. That's part of who they are, and you kind of respect that, even though you can see it's not actually helping them. So it's all about the framing of it, really. And of course, a secular comedy writer, or particularly a motivated one who says, I think same-sex relationships are brilliant, and I have a problem with the prejudice, and I'm going to write that in. Well, you know, that's what happens when you do that. And the church has controlled the narrative for 1,000 years before that, and have carefully said what's acceptable and what isn't. So, you know, we've done the same in terms of management of information and character and empathy and feeling and art and all that kind of stuff. So we shouldn't be surprised when we let go of that, give it away, whatever, that we get viewpoints that we theologically don't agree with. But I think the other thing is the fact that, again, so a sitcom has got this precinct, but it is a very, very slow moving sort of cocoon. In fact, it probably doesn't move at all. And therefore, whatever the character does or says, we're never really ever going to see the full consequences of that within the episode, let alone the series, let alone the entire run of the series. So if a character has a particular antisocial viewpoint and keeps being the same every time, eventually you just think, nobody would like this person. This person would actually be an alcoholic. And this person would actually have lost all their money. They'd have broken all their relationships. I mean, this is something that the great show Cheers was always making sure they had to be very careful about, because Americans feel differently about alcohol than British people do. British people are fairly pro-alcohol. American people are just like, I think the very first episode of Cheers, the very first scene, Sam Malone refuses to sell alcohol to a child who's pretending to be older or something like that, I think. And they have to go down the drink responsibly thing. But Norm, the character who sits at the end of the bar, who's funny, who talks disparagingly about his wife and clearly doesn't pay her any attention, that's a really sad character, isn't it? I mean, that's not a happy... And we love Norm. And, you know, Norm should have had his own spin-off show, and maybe he did and it didn't work. I can't quite remember. But great character. But you think we've really reached the limit of where this person will go.
Right.
And we've really become inured to what that kind of lifestyle will do. And therefore, that's why I often say sitcoms distort the consequences of sin. So you only show, as a comedy writer, the consequences of the sin that are dramatic, interesting, useful, will make life harder for your character. So it's not really in Friends' interest to show what it would be like to be married 3 times by the age of 35, or whatever Ross Geller is by the time he gets there. I mean, his love life is an absolute train wreck. And so that just has an effect, and it's a bit of a downer, actually. And so we're not going to see that. And so therefore, if we're living... So it was thrilling to grow up watching Friends. You know, I was living in London, watching it with my fiance, now wife. You know, I was also working in the media and all that kind of stuff. And so you think, I want to live that lifestyle, but you're only being shown a snapshot of what it could look like on a really good day and a really funny day. Not on a day where people are really questioning their life choices and actually thinking, I really should change. So that's the tragedy of sitcom characters, is that they don't change. But unfortunately, most people don't. You can only really change with the intervention of the Holy Spirit.
But in terms of like the sitcom, it distills real life. What's the typical duration of a sitcom storyline?
It's normally between 24 and 72 hours. And you need that compressed time scale because you're making life too easy for your characters. So rather than have a character go, oh, in 2 weeks' time, my long-standing friend from school who I've never liked is coming for dinner. That's too easy. They've got too long to manage that. They need this person needs to turn up in town and say, hey, I'm in town. It'll be great to meet up tomorrow night. Tomorrow night? Yeah, sure. It'd be great. Panic. What do I do now? We want that accelerated pressure.
But you're being shown what happens in that 48-hour period in 25 minutes. So it's distilled, but at the same time, it is also therefore distorting because, as you say, if people live like this in real life, they don't get to start the episode next week without the consequences of their decisions from the previous episode.
I mean, in a way, but there's a sense in which that is our experience, isn't it? That is what life is like.
Yeah.
Monday to Friday, the same sorts of things happen, and every Sunday night, you just think, right, work in the morning. Better iron this shirt. Okay, right, what's happening?
Yeah.
Take the kids to school. Oh, Thursday night. Oh, that's the night that this always happens. Got to go around and see my mum. Walk in the door. She says the same thing every single time. Yeah. Like I've never even heard that joke before. That's really weird. It's like a catchphrase, isn't it? You know, so that is to some extent the world we live in. So it is recognisably familiar. It's not a lie. It's just, a version of the truth, isn't it?
Yeah. And the sense that it's comforting because we don't want a situation tragedy. We want to feel comforted by the fact that these people are going through what we go through and somehow they're surviving. It's a happy ending in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just enough humiliation for us to find it funny, but not sufficient that they really do question their life choices. There's always that bittersweet Pyrrhic victory they have, where to some extent, I mean, where the result almost doesn't even matter. I mean, I blog about all this stuff on my Substack called The Situation Room, and the other day I was talking about a character is going to take their driving test. Now the question is, and this we've not even got onto this, and this will be possibly another area, is why do they want to pass their driving test? And every character has a different ultimate value. We would call it an idol, pretty much, but we all know what those idols are for us as well. But as an example, I want to pass my driving test first time because I'm the kind of person that always aces tests. It matters to me that I am perceived in a particular way. I can't remember what Enneagram type that is, but I'm a winner. I pass first time, and it matters to me for my pride. So I'm going to study. I'm going to work. I'm going to drive every single nook and cranny and road and lane where I could possibly go for my driving test because I'm passing this. Another character is I have to pass first time because my sister passed first time. And she is the favourite. She's the golden child. Okay. If I don't pass first time, then yet again, silly Sarah can't pass first time, And so suddenly it's that. I know somebody else for whom passing their driving test was freedom. I passed my test. I am out of here.
Yeah.
I cannot get away from my mother fast enough. So it's a bit like, with the storytelling, the driving test represents different things for different people. But in a sitcom, what happens is there's a conversation. So do they pass the test or not? Ideally, kind of doesn't matter. Because when a character says, without realizing it, I'm out of here because if I don't get away from my mum soon, someone's going to die. They just go, is that why you want to pass your test? To get away from me? Well, no, but yes, but truly. So they then have to have this resolution. Yeah. And she realizes that their mother's not down on her all the time. And so by the end, it's like, did they pass their test or not? I don't know. It kind of doesn't matter because it's an emotional, relational comedy, isn't it, between these two people? And so they can be, I now feel ready to drive my test. I don't mind if I pass or fail. Suddenly, an articulated lorry goes straight into the side of the car before they even get into it. And it's like, okay, we're not taking the test today then.
Right. So in terms of what a character wants, right? So Jeremy Truby's line that I'm always quoting is, Descartes said it's I think, therefore I am. But in story, it's I want, therefore I am. But to say I want to pass my driving test is not a sufficient basis for a character in a sitcom.
No. It's a plot. That's a plot.
It's an unspoken want.
Yeah.
Why does this character want to get past the driving test?
Yeah, and also, characters don't realise that other people want to do things for different reasons from them. So Mum is trying to help her pass her driving test because she thinks, I loved it when I passed my driving test. It meant that I could take my mum to the shops. And so she's helping her, just thinking she wants to pass because it's a good thing to be able to drive. Or somebody else would say, oh, you want to pass because you really fancy your driving instructor. It's like, no. That says much more about you. You fancy my driving instructor. I don't fancy my driving instructor. So we project our own hopes and dreams and fears onto other people, which is why, if Leslie Knope goes to Ron Swanson for advice, she's going to get Ron Swanson advice rather than Leslie Knope advice. But Leslie Knope's already tried her own stuff, so that isn't working. Yeah. Seems unlikely Ron Swanson's idea is going to work as well, but give it a try. But everyone's always offering their own idols to other people because they're all worried about different things.
That is what is so wonderful about sitcom. It shows us that aspect of our lives, which is that why is everyone not seeing the world the way that I see it? In a nice, comforting, manageable, charming way. So it's quite a lot of responsibility to be a sitcom writer then, James.
Well, on the occasions you get to do it, yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about the British and American differences because you've said there are no differences.
Well, if there are, I don't know what they are.
Endings, finishing a sitcom. It seems to me the Seinfeld ending in which the camera just pulls backwards along the corridor away from these guys who are stuck in prison having an inane conversation about whether they've had this particular conversation before. Was that meant to be the end of sitcoms? Because Seinfeld was doing something different where they weren't likable, there were no hugs and there was no learning. Wasn't sitcom supposed to be done?
I don't think so. I don't think they thought that. And I think Seinfeld was interesting because it's no hugging. They say no hugging, no learning, but nobody learns in any sitcom. So I think they were slightly stealing a base there. But I didn't like the last episode. I really didn't like it at all. But yeah, I mean, the fact that they're all locked in together, having the same conversation. Didn't we have this conversation before? And it's just like they're in the diner. But yeah, I just thought the whole thing was kind of stupid. But yeah, I don't know. There wasn't that sense of this is it. This is the end of sitcom. I don't think they had the hubris to do that because in a way, Larry David went off and did Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is exactly the same show as Seinfeld, but without it being written down quite so accurately.
Was Seinfeld the most successful at the time?
Yeah,
possibly.
Yeah, it was huge. Yeah. And the last ever episode of Seinfeld was the biggest non-sporting event in TV history, I think, or non-moon landing, non-sporting event.
And so, but that idea that you almost feel like you've come to the end of history because it's the now, and then, but that sitcoms after that had to acknowledge the fact that sitcoms had been sort of self-referential in this way, and so there was a wave of sitcom like Parks and Rec that needed to evolve and needed to be different again. I'm trying to say,
kind of. I mean, I think that was a shooting style which was kind of documentary, which is a bit like The Office.
Okay.
But that doesn't actually withstand any kind of scrutiny. And you know what? The audience don't care. If it's funny, they don't care.
Yeah.
There's a bit of breaking the fourth wall in Modern Family as well, but there's nothing. Otherwise, it's just the most bang traditional sitcom you can imagine that just happens to be absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So this idea that, we've come out the other side of sitcom, it's like, all right, tell that to the people who watch Big Bang Theory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like people aren't thinking about this stuff. They have a long day at work. They would like to laugh, so they turn on the television. Oh, it's Big Bang Theory. I like laughing. I like Big Bang Theory. Okay. There are jokes. It ends.
Yeah. So the idea that culture and perspective could be traced through the sitcom, you would reject that just because actually sitcom is just there to comfort and make people laugh.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like, I mean, most beer that's sold you've heard of. And then there are beers that you've never heard of that people who like beer much prefer. And that's fine, but people are still going to drink Coors or Beck's or Budweiser or whatever. It's like, that's just... So I think I don't think sitcoms are any different from anything else. Like TV dramas are TV dramas, and sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they're really weird. And the audience go, what's this? And the critics go, this is amazing. So there's high culture and low culture in sitcom as well.
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes you get something that's high and low at the same time, like Only Fools and Horses, which, or Modern Family, to be honest, it sort of manages to square the circle, but that's very rare. In TV terminology, people call a sitcom that they don't hate smart. Yeah, we're looking for a mainstream family sitcom, but one that's sort of, smart. What you mean, like Modern Family, because you don't hate it. It doesn't make you want to tear your eyes out, even though the audience at home are perfectly happy with a sort of show that you wouldn't like at all. So I think sitcom is just prone to the usual snobbery of, like Stuart Lee is a stand-up comedian. It's the jokes he's not doing that's really interesting. And I find it really funny and interesting. But if my parents were watching it, he would just go, "Well, this isn't funny though. Why is he doing this? He's saying the same thing again and again and again. That's not funny. He's now angry that I've come to this show. Why is he angry that I've come? You know what I mean? It's like, it's really funny if you've seen a lot of stand up and you get it. So I think sitcom is the same but there are styles. It doesn't, one sitcom informs another sitcom. So the Royal Family informed The Office, which then informed Parks and Rec and those sorts of things, and single camera stuff. But these things kind of go in waves and cycles and that kind of stuff.
And I suppose that one of the nice things about a sitcom is that it's such a movable thing. You just need to find a situation which people show the mutuality of being a human being.
Yeah, it's just people.
And that becomes the attraction, becomes the comfort and the reason why people want to watch it.
I think so. I mean, Frasier's about two brothers who are competitive.
Yeah.
And they're just pretentious, and one's more pretentious and successful than the other one. And their dad is a cop, working class, blue collar cop kind of guy. And so therefore we presume that both Frasier and Niles take after their mother because they look nothing like their dad.
Yeah.
But that, that's okay. But yeah, so, it's a dark art, and there's just no real reason why people like one show and then not like another one. And it's always interesting to work out why people didn't like this show. Should have worked. Why didn't it work? And so I did. If anyone watching this is fascinated, I used to do a Sitcom Geeks podcast. There are 222 episodes of it. But the thing that I would always do if we were interviewing someone, we interviewed Steve Moffat, who obviously did Sherlock and Press Gang back in the day, and Doctor Who. But he also did a sitcom called Chalk, which people really hated. It was set in a school. So eventually we managed to get to ask him about, so what happened with Chalk? We asked Graham Linehan about Paris, which was a sitcom before Father Ted, which people don't really remember. So yeah, there's always that sense of what happened there, and it's like, we didn't know when we thought this, and so I think those failure stories, which are obviously much more interesting anyway, are quite helpful. But these things all seem inevitable. Like Friends, of course, Friends was going to be a hit. No, not really.
And it was such a hit that it gave you quite a kicking in the ratings. You have quite a personal story.
Yeah. So I wrote an episode of My Family, a really mainstream British sitcom about a family, and it went out the same night as the last ever episode of Friends, which is on Channel 4. And so my episode only got 4.7 million or whatever it was. And Friends got a bit more than that, but not way more, I don't think, because again, people watch BBC One. It's the first channel that comes on your TV when you switch it on, or at least it used to. So had that massive inertia advantage. But I do remember. I remember the day. I remember it. And I think I probably didn't watch my episode. I'd just seen it. It'd been recorded. I was at the recording.
The reason why I put out this essay this week was because last Sunday was 30 years since the first episode of Friends aired on American television.
Wow. Now I feel old.
Yeah. But it's weird because it's 30 years ago that it came out, and it's now almost 10 years ago since it was re-released on Netflix and then found a whole new audience among kind of Gen Z and even Gen Alpha. But the challenges of something that has such cultural weight and cultural significance for the 90s.
But here's the other reason it's so successful, and take it from me, it's really, really funny. And I know that sounds daft.
Yeah.
But when we were first married, we were living in a small flat in Shepherd's Bush. And I remember having a bath. Melissa was watching Friends in the other room. And all I could hear from where I was the audience laughter. That was the only bit that came through the wall.
Right.
And just the regularity of hearing that audience laugh was just unbelievable. I could not believe it was just laugh.
Yeah.
Laugh. And you just think,
yeah.
Just like every other line is a joke and it gets a laugh, and they're not faking that because you're not thinking, why did the audience laugh at that? That wasn't funny.
Yeah.
The whole thing is just like absolutely engineered to be as funny as possible. So, it can be done, but it was. And so I think people forget that one thing about it is it was really funny.
Now, one comment we had on the video essay that I'll just share with you. So someone was talking about the possibility that Christians watch sitcoms differently from non-Christians. Now, I'm not completely convinced that they do, but the suggestion was that a non-Christian or someone who doesn't have the Christian vision of the world is watching a sitcom in order to escape from the ultimate tragedy of life. Whereas a Christian who believes that life is ultimately a comedy, and our situation is being written by a comedy writer, the Christian can watch a sitcom recognizing its truth that everything's going to be okay in the end, that there is a happy ending to the world.
Yeah, there's something in that. I don't think people consciously think most of these things, but the fact that the situation comedy doesn't seem wildly untruthful would imply that we do genuinely think the universe is hardwired in a particular way. Mm-hmm. And that certain behavior will not be rewarded or should not be rewarded. And certain, there are certain themes of life generally in terms of family or loyalty or courage or virtue or kindness or humility and those sorts of things. So it's a bit of a mirror in terms of what values we espouse and what we really truly believe. And I think once you see it played out, it's a bit, and I guess it's a bit like that, the story that's told to King David about, this unjust story. And look, this story should not be allowed to stand. And it's like, that's you, that is. Sorry, at the risk of quoting History Today, one of the great sketches from Newman and Baddiel. Mm-hmm. So they do evoke in us sort of reactions that sometimes surprise us as well. And actually, there's even a difference between when you record it, when you write it, when you record it, and when you watch it at home. You just think, oh, now I'm watching it at home, I feel very differently about what I'm seeing. Mm. So it's very, very slippery. But the audience bring their own values to it, and sometimes they don't even know what their values are. Mm-hmm. And Christians and non-Christians don't know what their values are, and so they react in particular ways. But that original statement, I guess it's true, but I don't know how many people experience that as true. Yeah.
And whether it just taps into this sense that the world is okay, as you're saying, justice and truth and these things matter, that can't be explained. It might be that you don't have a category within your philosophy of reality that says, yes, this is why everything is going to be okay in the end. But there is something about the world that's communicating to you that things ought to be okay in the end at some level. And that, arguably it's culture that is very good at doing sitcom is so thoroughly saturated in the Christian vision of the world, the Christian story, that without even trying to, we put in the idea that if a character tells a lie in the first 3 minutes, they will face judgment at the end of it. Whereas a culture that was properly, nihilistic or anarchist would never try to resolve that, would say, well, there is no resolution.
I think that's why a great comedy character, even though I don't love the show, is Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, because he's someone who sees the world in a Spock-like, logical, scientific way, and he is constantly disappointed and confounded.
Yeah.
And we know entirely why. We can see the world through his eyes. We just go, yeah, I know it doesn't make any sense, but we all know that it's true. I know it shouldn't be true, Sheldon, but it is true. Yeah. And you're an idiot for not realizing that, even though you are obviously the smartest guy, not just in the room, but in the town,
Yeah. It's like he's blind to something. Yeah.
Yeah, he's blind to emotion because he just thinks it's just chemicals. It's like, okay, you can think it's chemicals if you want, but Penny's crying now, and you're just going to stand and watch there whilst liquid comes down her face, are you? Okay.
Yeah. Very good. James, you've mentioned your Substack already, Situation Room, is that right?
Yeah, so it actually says Situation Room because there's a typo in it, which I've left in intentionally now. But if you Google Situation Room James Cary, I've got a few videos on YouTube as well. Okay. But I have a whole other Substack Almanac, a post which is like different Christian days of the year in the calendar, and that people seem to find that interesting as well. So anyway, maybe we'll put some links below or something.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. And the other thing is that your books on these sorts of subjects, The Sacred Art of Joking and The Gospel According to a Sitcom Writer, people can buy those from you?
Well, Amazon's probably easiest, isn't it? I mean, other bookshops are available, but they're not as well stocked and they don't deliver quite as quickly. So...
Well, there we go. Well, thank you very much. It's nice to have a conversation about your day job. First time I'd actually found out what you do for a living, but there we go.
Thanks for having me.
I've been Reformed Mythologist Nate Morganlock. I'm glad you were here.